And thank you everyone for joining us today. And thank you to the Geo Institute for inviting me. Today, I want to talk about developing deeper consumer insights through cultural understanding. And I want to start by talking about the challenge facing marketers today. And I want to do so through a Harvard Business article that reads, many companies are turning to customer search that is powered by data and analytics. Although that approach can provide astonishingly detailed pictures of some aspects of their markets, the pictures are far from complete and often misleading. It might be possible to predict a customer's next mouse click or purchase, but no amount of quantitative data can tell you why she made that click or purchase. Without that insight, companies cannot close the complexity gap. And this from the Journal of Marketing. Conventional market research, surveys, big data, focus groups, has failed to inspire executives to stimulate organizational creativity. So there is abundant consumer data available. That is not the problem that we are facing today. In a recent project that I did on millennial and Gen Z travel, I found that there was lots and lots and lots of trend reports, big data reports on what millennials and Gen Zs were up to in the travel industry. Much of it answered things like, what are they doing and who are they? And sometimes a narrow, how are they going about their business? It focused on things like behaviors, general demographics, and shifts. It was actionable, sure, and informative as I tried to understand the lay of the land, but it was not particularly deep. So we get something like this. There's a trend. Millennials and Gen Zs care about authenticity. And so the triggered action we see by companies are things like, oh, quick, let's provide feelings of authenticity to consumers. Or we see something like this. There's a trend, Gen Z wants to connect digitally with more travel brands. Well, sure, of course. And so we quickly scamper to create more digital interaction points. What's the problem? It's actionable. There's probably are seeing some results, but there's no explanation of why. Why do millennials and Gen Zs care about feelings of authenticity? Is it because they're feeling like they're living inauthentic lives? If they're wanting to get something different out of travel experiences than people from the past? Have we always cared about authenticity and it's only surfacing now? We don't have a clear understanding even of what authenticity means, never mind how we can provide it to them. And so we're acting, but not acting on particularly insightful information. Similarly, we are creating more digital interaction points with consumers, but why? What are they trying to achieve? Are they looking for inspiration? Are they looking for information? Are they trying to share after their trip? Are they trying to share that they went on an authentic trip? We don't have a clear understanding of what the meaning of those digital interactions are for those consumers in their lives. And so we might create a whole lot of actions and interaction points, but if we don't have a clear understanding of why, we're often shooting in the dark. And so big data and trend reports are mainly what and who, and they have a place. They certainly have a place. You just heard from Frank Mulhern about how this is a centerpiece of a modern university. It's certainly a centerpiece of our program here at the Medill School in our Integrated Marketing Communications program. But it only gets you so far. And we see it having an outsized role today in marketing communications budgets. Their big data is often surface level, what people are doing, and provides basic background. Trend reports keep firms informed, but often not ahead, so you're constantly chasing the next trend. Both of these show you patterns of behavior, and as we heard about earlier, in quite detailed reports. But at times we see processes, click-through processes, etc. But big data and trend reports rarely explain why. Why do people do or why people don't do things in their daily lives? It's often decontextualized. And so we get that sliver, but we're not actually sure where that action lives in the consumer's world. These reports also often, and data often rarely understand tensions, pain points, sources of enchantment, communication goals that truly drive consumer behavior in both digital and face-to-face environments, and that provide marketers fodder for telling resonant stories. And so what and who and process data often suggest tactics like digital engagement, and we often see success from them, but often not strategic direction. And so the process often looks like this. We go from what data, big data reports that we're running internally, or trend reports that are external, to so what? We develop strategy, and we develop surface level strategy. We're keeping up, we're following the trend. But what I'm arguing for today is to develop more resonant insights. And I want to introduce this idea by using this image of a tree. This tree image is from a company called Context Research Group, and they use this to explain this process to their clients. So you have the leaves, the branches, the trunk, and that's where big data and trend reports and surveys, self-report data sits. It's what's quantified, it's behavioral, and it's often individualized but decontextualized. It's what you see. Cultural analysis, often from qualitative data though, sits below the surface. It's the roots. It's what's not quite as readily accessible. It's not quite as visible. It's a little bit harder to analyze. It's why people do what they do and say what they say. It's the process in social context. It focuses on cultural meaning systems. This is where the nuanced understandings are developed, and this is the source of insight. And so we have to see both the leaves and the roots to make long-term strategic decisions for innovation and for communication. And so I'm arguing today for adding why to our process of strategic development. Why and what actually converse really nicely together. You might see an interesting trend in your report and go, why is this happening, as you're running the numbers and you see interesting patterns occur. Big data and what I'll call small data or cultural data can talk to each other really nicely. And from there, we can develop a strategic so what. That I'm arguing today will help you to develop more novel innovation, more resonant stories, and more enduring strategy. But this why needs more focus. And so to answer why, we need to actually shift our perspective and our process for understanding customers. And to introduce this idea, I want to use my favorite cartoon. I use this cartoon in all of my courses, and it is by Tom Fishburne, who draws marketing cartoons, basically poking fun at the marketing industry and all of the silly things that we do. And this cartoon is entitled Inside the Mind of the Consumer. And so here inside the mind of the consumer, you see my husband, my kids, friends, Fifi, who we presume is the dog or cat or some sort of pet, home, sunsets, me, myself, my parents, my career. And then we see these two gentlemen sitting here, and they say, and the first says, I don't see our brand of pickled relish anywhere. If you don't know what pickled relish is, don't worry about it. It's a condiment that Americans like to put on sandwiches and different types of things like that. So I don't see our brand anywhere in this consumer's mind. And then the person who's talking to says, that's inconceivable. This is a brand loyalist. This person is a brand loyalist, and yet there is no place in their mind for the customer. Consumers do not care about brands or products. I realize this is heresy to the group that I'm talking to right now, to say that they don't actually care about your brand or product. What they do care about is the value that the brand helps them. They value brands that help them to do things better in their daily lives. They value products and brands that are going to help them to play the role of wife, mother, coworker, friend, or parent better. And so if this is a brand loyalist, then perhaps this is something that a product she feels she needs to have when she throws a large gathering at her house, and to have a full spread to show to her friends that she's a good friend and she cares about them through food. Perhaps it's her husband's favorite thing to put on his sandwich, and so she feels like a good wife. perhaps it's something, the only thing that her children will eat, eat their vegetables with. And so she feels like a good mother when she gives it to them. Here to play the role of wife, mother, coworker, or friend, this product kind of facilitates her playing these roles in her life. The products, brands, and content that we produce are only tools. Marketers have to shift their perspective and their processes to understand the brand in the context of this woman's life. And so to shift our perspective, we need to focus on understanding why, by focusing on the underlying cultural meanings that orient consumers as they go about their daily lives. And we'll talk a lot about that today. We make the familiar strange. We question what we think we might know. What does it mean to be a mother or to entertain in the prior case? We make the tacit explicit, the things that are often unsaid, the embodied norms and practices that aren't said but nonetheless guide behavior. And so we also need to shift the processes we engage in to do this. We typically use qualitative data, but not always, and we can talk about some of the really interesting ways in which we've been taking a cultural approach to more quantitative data. But it's typically qualitative because we're focusing on life as lived, what people do, what they say as they talk about their lives. We're getting to things like the meanings of the roles and products and services and practices. And we're understanding the pain points, the sources of enchantment, and the communication goals of customers. And so as we shift our perspective, I want to run through a couple of examples. And the first one is home research, so research on the home. And I'm going to, again, start with some trend research or big data research in which we might start a project by asking, what are the on-trend colors or fabrics or styles of furniture or design styles or home technologies that are kind of hot right now? What's on trend? We might look at popular search terms and click patterns. These are constantly evolving and, of course, important to know for a furniture or design company, a home builder, or home technology purchaser or producer. Cultural research is different. Cultural research starts by seeing the home as a place charged with symbolic and moral meaning. And so we take a step back and make the familiar strange and say, what is home? Like, what is the meaning of home? How do you make a house a home? What are the practices that occur, that take place in order to make a home? What are the routines and rituals surrounding home? And why are we engaging in those practices? These are enduring drivers of insights and often pay off years down the road. And so a colleague of mine, Grant McCracken, he's an anthropologist, a marketer, and a marketing consultant, asked, what are the meanings and practices that make a home? He asked this in his research many, many years ago. And the process that he engaged in was participant observation. He went to people's houses. He spent time with them. And what he learned is when he asked questions about home, why this is here, why that's there, people aren't very good at reporting on that, right? I don't know, I just like it. But he observed. He observed what they were doing, how they were doing it. He talked to them about the process of picking out the furniture, of what was performed in the home, what types of activities were performed in the home. And here's what he found. He observed that people engage in a range of these tacit, so unspoken, but just totally kind of naturalized practices to make a home. They arrange a furniture in a way that just kind of feels right, often in a circle. He observed layers of fabric, personalized memories, and little reminders. He observed warm paint colors. Okay, interesting, potentially actionable. But he asked why. And so he analyzed his data, as cultural researchers do. And he said, okay, well, these help to make, as he's going through home after home after home after home, and conversation after conversation after conversation, saying, well, these help to make a home feel cozy, to feel safe, feel warm. He even talks about how a home is really, if you really look at metaphorically, it's kind of giving you a big hug as it's kind of closing in on you, making a big space small. And he said, but why? So again, interesting, useful, informative, but why? He pushed it further. And this is where he landed. In an alienating world where there are thousands of people doing the same job as us, where we are just a number out there, home is the place where we feel unique and we can perform self and family. It is a stage for us to perform family, and it is set up so. He said, if the world out there is cold and modern, and where we often have low status, where sometimes we feel disempowered, there's somebody above us always telling us what to do, always criticizing our work. Home then is a source of empowerment. It's a status corrector. It is a place where we feel empowered, that we feel like is ours. We have made it our place in the world. It is me. So we come home and this is the place, this is my domain. Now, these were, again, not things that people told him. Instead, they just liked what they liked. They did what they did, but house after house, home after home, he saw different patterns. And so there are real implications for a furniture company, a design firm, a home builder, and all forms of technology producers who are creating in-home devices right now. There are implications for innovation, for branding, and for resonant storytelling. Here's just one page out of the Crate and Barrel catalog. Crate and Barrel is a company that produces home furnishings, furniture, and various knickknacks and pots and pans and things like that for the home. This is a page from their catalog, and you just see how homey it feels. And they talk about how the home is made for these bonding moments to facilitate the relationship between grandfather and grandson. That's an insight that is going to be long lasting. The colors might change, some of the patterns, the what's might change, but that insight lasts a while. And now it doesn't apply to everyone. This was done in the American and Canadian context, and it was done a while ago. And so certainly things have changed. But I wanted to show you the kind of process that he went through and how that differs from how we might approach research traditionally. And so to answer why, we have to kind of understand the cultural drivers. And so I want to take a quick minute to take a slightly academic detour to talk about what we mean by culture. As we talked about in the introduction, that culture is really hard to understand in many ways because we use the word in so many different ways, such that it's actually lost a lot of its own meaning. And so I want to talk about how anthropologists and consumer researchers think about culture. We see culture as systems of meanings, practices, symbols, norms, goals, values, and rituals that are shared. It feels somewhat abstract because we can't put our fingers on it, and it's often hard to measure. Individuals gain cultural knowledge through socialization and experiences. From the minute we're born, we are gaining cultural knowledge. From when our parents say, no, 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 don't do that, or yay, you did it. We're learning from our caregivers, our families, our friends. What are we supposed to do or not supposed to do? And so when you see your mother pick up the phone and she says, I know I'm not supposed to be doing this at the table, but, or you see her, you see that contradiction. You hear it right away. You hear a parent telling a child not to do one thing and then doing it themselves. You see the tensions and the meanings in all of their complex form through socialization, what you observe as a child. This sets up what you think you want to be, what you think you want to do, what you think life is supposed to look like. These are cultural meanings in action. But we are not carbon copies of what our parents want us to be. Of course, we have experiences later in life, and we embody new cultural knowledge through that process. One of the reasons why culture is really hard, I think, for marketers and just more generally to understand is it's the water that we swim in. It becomes so embodied and so naturalized and so taken for granted that we just see it as normal. It's normal that my office looks like this. It's just appropriate. And it's often apparent in the shoulds, the tries to, the buts, the wishes, the contradictions. So when I say, oh, I really should have gone to the gym today, or I really shouldn't eat that. In that should, you're hearing something about what's good food, what I frame as good food and bad food. What my cultural world frames as good food and bad food. You're tapping into that systems of meanings of food and food ways that I might not be able to explicitly articulate to you, but that you hear as I'm kind of going about talking through my daily life. And so cultural researchers become really sensitized to certain words, to certain practices. Your cultural knowledge is often apparent in comparison. When you go to another person's home in another country, or even in another part of the city, we often see our own embodied cultural meaning systems and practices because they might be different from others. Culture is socially and culturally created over time, and these meanings accrete. So we as societies come to understand what a home is, what a home means, and what work means, what dinner time is supposed to look like, what technology is for, and how we are supposed to interact with it. None of this is natural out there in the world. Oh, technology, this is how I'm supposed to use it. These meanings build up over time. And meanings and practices are reflected in media, in the content, in marketing and advertising, in technology. So it's reflected in them, but it's also fueled and shaped by them. And so adept marketers draw on and shape cultural meaning systems in their communications, but they have to deeply understand those cultural meaning systems in a really nuanced way in order to do so adeptly. And so I want to show an example here, if it works, we'll see how the technology goes here, of a campaign. This is a campaign that I selected because I was actually hoping most of you were familiar with it. And I'm wanting to kind of frame it in this conversation. So Procter & Gamble has launched their Sponsors of Mom campaign in 2009, I believe. And they have done it with every Olympic Games, where they sponsor moms to go to the Olympics. And they show these really moving videos of moms. And so I want to watch it and have you really think about what it means to be a mom and their understanding of what it means to be a mom, how they've adeptly kind of understood it, and how they're kind of fueling the meanings through this advertisement. Moderators, if you cannot hear my sound, please let me know. I'm just going to double check here that it is on. It is. So if you can't, please jump in and let me know. And if you can't see my screen, also please jump in and let me know.
该起床喽，该上学啦。Time to get up, baby.
Come on, appliquez.
Que eu vou fazer café da manhã gostoso pra você.
So my students know that I can't watch that video because I will start crying. There are certainly differences in the ways that motherhood is practiced globally, the what and the how, but that mothers want to support their children, that being a mother is hard, that it is monotonous and thankless, and that despite that, the joys of parenthood make it worth it. These are enduring, cross-cutting cultural meanings and tensions and sources of enchantment that P&G recognizes. They are still engaged in this campaign many, many years later because it resonates so much. It makes so much sense for their target market, which is moms. And so they recognize these enduring cultural meanings, tensions, and sources of enchantment, and they recognize it with this kind of deeply resonant thank you. And so certainly one could imagine an ad that focused on the attributes of diapers, paper towels, and razors, or even how the athletes use these razors or paper towels, or how they were in these diapers as babies and that helped them to be successful athletes today, but they don't. Instead, Procter & Gamble positions itself as the brand that understands moms, the primary purchasers of their products. And by shifting the perspective, they created just an incredibly successful campaign. The insights were reflected in the stories that resonate. And so once we shift our perspective to focus on understanding cultural meaning systems, we need to focus then on the processes of developing these insights, because they are different processes than we often engage in. And so to shift the process, I want to hear from a few of our colleagues at the published in the MIT Sloan Management Review. Colleagues of ours reported that by delving into the richness of people's life stories, ethnographic research can pivot companies away from less meaningful segmentation parameters like demographics or purchase history, and towards those that drive behavior, such as purchase and intent. Quantitative techniques such as factor analysis, can subsequently be applied to locate and size market segments. They say that ethnographic stories can help companies rethink their assumptions about markets. And this in a QRCA article by a colleague of Rita Denny, one of our panelists today. He says, when ethnography really works, it changes the frame of understanding. It upends rather than confirms thinking. Upending our thinking about our product category. That often provides new opportunities for communications, even for product development. And so before we talk about process, I want to give you an example of it. And it is from Dana Boyd, who is an expert on teen media use. And her goal is to learn about teen technology use. That was her goal in this research that I'm about to show you. And her approach was to ask questions and focus her analysis on life, not on technology, to see where it came in and how. This is a report from a 2-hour interview with a 16-year-old girl, where she's just kind of sitting with her, talking with her in her space as she's kind of going, kind of interacting with things online and offline. And she said, I did not once mention technology, even though technology was the anchor for our conversation. That was her research focus. She didn't mention it as a researcher. Said, in most interviews, technology seeps in without me even having to look for it. We talked about girls using messaging tools because they are boy crazy, how social networking reveals school cliques that are visible in the schoolyard, and how cell phones are the new Nikes, both in terms of their potential as a status marker and as an object to be stolen. And we talked about how she was really into reading and writing online Harry Potter fan fiction, but did not let anyone around her know about it because it wasn't cool. She says all of these technology-centric elements are important, but they make so much more sense when understood in context. So the analysis of patterns in data from many teens allows her to, quote, uncover and describe how teens see the world first, and how this shapes their approach to the engagement with the digital technology, to see technology from their perspective in order to get what they take for granted. And so how do we do this? Well, we do two things. First, we have to scope the problem differently and more broadly than we typically do, which is hard because we're often under deadline and we want to be laser focused, but we need to give ourselves a little bit of breathing room. And then we use methods to understand cultural meaning systems to answer those questions. So let's start with the questions. To scope the problem or research question more broadly, we typically make the familiar strange, as I talked about earlier. We question the assumptions that we've made about a category and ask these really naive questions. For example, Procter & Gamble probably asked, or could have asked if we couldn't backwardly induct, what does it mean to be a mother today? What are the practices associated with motherhood? What makes a mom compared with being a father or a grandparent? What are the tensions, pain points, and joys that arise from being in the category of mom? A phone maker might ask, what is a phone? Like, what is actually a phone today? It's not a phone. What is a phone? What role does it play in consumers' lives? Where does it come into live in a consumer's life? Where does it not live in a consumer's life? What are the rituals associated with the device? What tensions, pain points, and joys arise from it? These are not questions to ask consumers because they're really hard to report on. I can't report on these things, but they frame the research efforts for an agency or an organization so that then you can kind of, you can scope out your research plan from there. So then we need to actually collect this data. We collect ethnographic data to answer these research questions. We engage in things like participant observation, which is watching and talking with individuals or groups in their natural environment. We participate in life with people to understand their lives. They are not our subjects. They are our partners in trying to understand these cultural meanings. They help us figure out what's taken for granted in their lives. And we flow from the digital to the non-digital and back again because that is the way our daily life works. We see the meanings in motion. With depth interviews, the idea is to understand the ideals, the meanings they put on their behavior, the tensions, the pain points, the goals, the things that they're saying that they're struggling with, that they love to do, what's hard, what's easy. We focus on how consumers make sense of their behavior. We're not asking them to report on the truth and trying to catch them if they're not telling us the truth. We're wanting them to tell us about their lives and to hear all the contradictions that come up in it, because in those contradictions, we often get some really interesting cultural insights about the challenges and cultural tensions that exist in our world today. We hear the language that they use to make sense of their world. We use digital data. It's not actually the data source with ethnography. It's the lens and approach that you bring to it. So anything can be used to understand meanings, symbols, and practices. We can use discussions in online forums, YouTube videos, differences in conversations online or off, text chains, web surf patterns. All of these are clues to understanding why. It's hard not to have participant observation or depth interview data, at least some of that with these other things, but it's not impossible. And then we analyze. Across all, we're analyzing patterns of meaning to make the invisible visible. Cultural research is being done at top organizations around the world. This seems kind of squishy to many of you likely. We are quantitatively focused. Our business schools focus on quantitative metrics. Oftentimes in marketing research classes, there's one day that's taught as kind of qualitative, where we kind of learn really kind of basic methods. And we're often asked to quantify for people within, at the top of the organization. So this push to quantification often makes us say, this is a little too squishy for our organization. It might be, but it's not squishy for organizations like these, which are just a few of the countless organizations that use cultural research, some of which have ethnographers employed at top levels within their organization. Intel here, for example. Intel has ethnographers employed at top levels of their organization because they need to see the future. Now, I don't claim to understand anything about their industry, but from what I do understand, they have to innovate sometimes 10 years down the road. They have to know what types of processing our computers and phones are going to need 10 years out. They have to be able to see the future. And they do that by asking cultural questions. At one point, Ken Anderson, works at Intel, talked about how they were engaging in a project on busyness, what it means to be busy today. He heard people talking with each other about how busy they were. I'm busy, I'm so busy, I'm so busy. How are you? Oh, busy, 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 busy had become something that we were using to talk about how, to show how we were engaging in our world. We used it to show just how important we were, but we're also just feeling really busy. Not everybody, but they were seeing patterns of this globally. And so Intel actually conducted a global study of busyness. What does it mean to be busy? And yes, how does that impact technology? It influenced their shift towards creating processors that allowed for more multitasking, for us to be able to take our phones and just click on them, touch on them around the phone. Again, I don't fully understand microprocessing, but apparently that's a different set of technologies than if we were going to do one task deeply. So cultural research is being used by organizations at various levels. And so how can you reorient your organization in small and large ways around cultural thinking? The first thing you can do is ask culturally oriented questions of research, teams of insight teams of your data teams. So you can ask your team some of these questions. You can ask them, what is the source of this trend or this change or this shift that you're telling me about? What is X really? What is our product domain really? What is our product category or just the overall domain? What is the meaning of it? They might look panicked, but we'll talk about what to do next in a minute. Focus on the norms, the values, the goals, the rituals at play. You can ask, what are the cultural tensions and pain points underlying this trend or in this domain? You can conduct cultural analysis yourself. You can support data collection in context. You can focus analysts on going beyond what to answer why, and you can provide the time to develop these insights. Some of this does take a little bit more time to really scope out the problem, to analyze the data, to really engage in the field. Rita Denny later on can talk to you about how she has done some projects fairly quickly, and it's amazing how quickly she works compared with academics. But it does take a little bit more time. The deeper the insights are, the more enduring they'll be, so they pay off in the long term with that initial investment. You can also seek those with cultural mindsets. You can hire analysts, planners, management teams with qualities of what Grant McCracken calls chief culture officers. In fact, he has a whole book on it. You can hire cultural analysts. You can also contract out. You can hire culturally oriented researchers to help you think about more specific problems. Again, Rita, who's going to talk later, does this for a lot of different types of organizations, companies, government organizations, and nonprofits. And you can train. You can provide job training and mentorship. And finally, you can embrace a storytelling mindset. You can actually use cultural data as a rhetorical tool to tell powerful stories to management about opportunities to encourage strategic change. And so while you might not have the quantitative data up there, you have moms telling their heartfelt stories about how hard it is to be a mother today. That data is an incredibly powerful tool. And if you have it and you have analyzed it well and you can tell a powerful story from those insights, those are going to resonate within your organization. And then of course, you can use the data analysis to tell insight-driven stories to connect with your customers. And so in review, there's abundant data and information out there, but there's often a paucity of insights. We're leaving a lot of insights on the table. Most data focuses on behavior, but not the deeper understandings of why. And this really requires a shift in perspective to focus on understanding cultural meaning systems, and requires a shift in process to collecting and analyzing contextualized data for understanding digital and physical social worlds, tensions, and pain points. And finally, the organizations can refocus around cultural understanding for novel innovation, opportunities, more resonant storytelling and content creation, and ultimately for more sustainable competitive advantage. Thank you. That's all I have for you this morning. And I'll turn it over to our panel discussion now.
Thank you, Dr. Michelle. I certainly hope that we stop taking culture for granted, challenge norms, assumptions, delve and understand more into the why of things. I am sure it will give us invaluable insights that can better inform our choices and strategies. Indeed, it was a very, very insightful presentation. Thank you again.
Thank you.